Good morning, everybody. It's gonna go. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, sis.
Yeah. It's good to be with you today. Yeah. All the way. You're so far away.
So far, but so close. I've
Yeah.
just been creeping you all morning. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome.
It's been really cool. Thanks for joining. Do you want to introduce yourself, Linz?
Sure. Well, good morning, everybody. My English name is Lindsay Delaronde. I'm Kahnawake from Kahnawake, aka Mohawk territory. And I currently live and work and raise my family on the Kwangin territory. I have two daughters, a 13-year-old who's also Mohawk and Métis, and a little 1.5-year-old baby named Destiny, who is New Channels from Ahawsit and also Kahaga from Kahnawake. So very blessed to have a shared family, raise my family here in this beautiful territory with my partner, Guy Louis, traditional singer. Yeah, it's been a beautiful life out here on the West Coast. Very grateful. Yeah.
Well, I'm super grateful that you've joined me today. I'm one of your biggest fans,
Thank you.
Supporters.
Yes.
And, you know, I really, really wanted to have this opportunity just to ask you a little bit about your life, you know, and I know you can't really separate who you are from being an artist, so-called artist,
Right.
you know, but you've done so many projects, been a part of so many projects, especially like performance, you know, in public performance pieces. And I'm just wondering if you could tell me, you know, just to start off, what was one of those first big projects? And, you know, what kind of really inspired that for you? And what was that experience like? One of the first ones.
Oh, right. Within the residency, do you mean? Do you think
Just in general, Linz, just in general, yeah.
Interesting question. The first, I'll just go with what comes up first for me, but it's the performance that I did with your sister, Emilee Gilpin, Great Flowers. I mean, it wasn't one of the first ones, but it was one of the performances that I really found myself working in a way strategically that was really hitting a lot of the key points of how I want to continue to work. I mean, I think Accord was also one of the larger projects where I brought more of an Indigenous framework from Kim Anderson's approach into the studio, into the dance studio. And there we had an opportunity to work with Indigenous and non-Indigenous women and use Kim Anderson's framework of resist, reclaim, construct, and act. And so really grounding the work in an Indigenous worldview and framework. Yes, honey. Wow. And so I feel like that was very powerful as well, because as I was reflecting on my practice the other day and moving into a PhD in theater, this is my struggle right now is, you know, these very site-specific performance pieces that have a lot to do with environment and audience outside of the stage and engaging in the natural environment. I mean, I think that was very powerful to really embody these restoring narratives of women, having an opportunity to really look at the unmet need. We really looked at like the unmet need in these experiences of trauma and how we could come together collectively and work together collectively and to use movement and sound to be able to, I think, create an integration process. And I think that's extremely important for healing. My work has a lot to do with performance, but I would say mostly it has to do with healing. You know, I do come from, she fell. One second.
That's okay. And just for those who are watching or listening, Lindsay was just talking about a project called Accord that she curated and took part in when she was Victoria's Artist in Residence. Yes. So that was 2017 when you were named Victoria's Artist in Residence, and there you were able, you kind of had some resources or some space to be able to really breathe life into some projects. And so that project that you were just speaking about, for those who aren't aware, Accord, you know, you brought together Indigenous and non-Indigenous women. And not only was it this public performance that took place at the legislature buildings in so-called Victoria, but it was the whole process leading up to the creation of that piece. Can you tell me a little bit about what went into those rehearsals, the conversations? How did the dancers come up with their performances? What went into behind the scenes?
This was the insight, I think, from Monique Selez's years of moving bodies in the studio. And so we co-facilitated. So in terms of the cultural and spiritual grounding of the work, I really kind of did the leadership there, and then bringing and researching Kim Anderson's work and applying that framework. And then Monique intuitively, you know, started to notice that when we were telling our stories, we were using our hands, we were using our body, we were actually telling our stories through these movements and motions. And so she hooked into that, and then we applied that methodology, I would say, into everybody's story. So really encouraging people to really embody their stories. And so when we talk about resist, what is it that we're resisting? What is it that we're reclaiming? What is it that we're reconstructing through reclaiming? And then how do we go about and act with this new information, with this new acquired information, this new embodied information? How do we go out into the world with this new information through this healing journey? And then how do we apply that in our life in a real, tangible way? And so that was some of the conversations that we were talking about. We heard a lot of painful stories. I think you know, women in our cultures and in our societies have endured a lot of violence, you know, violations, actions of violations, internalized oppression. I think that we're healing from, you know, multiple generations of trauma, and really looking at effects of intergenerational trauma. So when I was doing my master's in clinical counseling for Indigenous communities, that was something that I really, really grounded in, was trauma work. Particularly for men, though, in my master's work, I really looked at impacts of trauma on Indigenous men specifically, and created a program called Art as Ceremony. And that was bringing in spirituality, art therapy, expressive arts therapy, and kind of overlaying it with a psychoeducational component to really bring together all of those pieces to understand what happens to us when we do experience trauma, what happens to the body, what happens to the mind, what happens to the spirit, and how do we repair maybe something that happened that we don't even remember, but or how do we repair you know, patterns of behavior from that trauma. So I think it takes a real specific alchemy to work this way. That's why I wouldn't call myself specifically just like a performance artist, or they're interdependent in their own disciplines that I kind of weave together. But fundamentally, it was really important for me to get the proper training, the proper skills to be able to bring people into this more therapeutic process, which is used for the creation process. So they're kind of one and the same. I mean, I think it's a little bit similar to when you go see an art therapist. You know, you sit there with your therapist and you have these conversations and you go into this art making process, and it's this very intimate space. But when you start to look at, you know, public performance and theater work, I think it really takes what I was started to understand is, you know, the answers and the solutions have to come from the performers. The answers and the solutions live and exist within each artist, to their unique understanding, to their interpretation of their work and how they're manifesting the vision of it. And how do I, as a facilitator, as, you know, a holder of space, how do I really attune in? I think about alignment and attunement, and that takes a profound amount of inner self-reflection on my part. And so they work simultaneously, you know, that internal self-work, modifying my own behaviors, being able to look at my own patterns of behaviors, you know, my own triggers. I mean, I think you wrote a magnificent post the other day about the projections of, you know, we think that it's other people doing something, but it's really that inner work and that healing that we have to do. And that was very powerful. And I really believe in the spirit of each person. You know, we all have a journey. And so the more that I'm able to really like clean my ears out and remove the debris, and really sit in ceremony with people, I can really understand that deep listening is a type of ceremony. There's going to be information coming, and we have to be able to hold it and pick it up and not solve it for people and repackage and give it back to them. You know, I think that's one thing that I've been able to really learn how to do, I think. And that's the training from being a counselor and sitting in that place where it's like, I know what's going on, you know, I can feel it, I'm hearing it, there's intuition being involved, I can see a solution sitting there, but I don't say it, you know, maybe kind of guide people to their own answers. And I think that's really about empowerment, and that's what self-determination means, and that's what I think the essence of that all is, you know.
Self-determination means empowerment.
Yeah, for sure. And allowing people to make mistakes, you know, to make mistakes in the work, to make you know, to grind and have that tension, I think is really important. I think it's healthy. I think it has to be done in a very loving and caring way. For specifically, even for Rage Flowers, when me and Erin got together, we had Jordan Daly, who was in her training for somatic therapies. And that Rage Flowers piece was something that we really had to dig in. There's the surface of the work, and then there's, you know, those moments and experiences that we had to share when we were like, when were we enraged? And so we used Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata to enter into this stage, and we acted as zombies, and we forced these smiles, and we held our throats to have these silent screams, and nothing was coming out. And so we really wanted to use that music intentionally with our body movements to tell the story of the impacts of colonization, you know, this very like deadening state of mind and body and being. You know, the fog, the repetition, the mundane, the goals that we get caught in, the high productivity, I think that we're all noticing in COVID-19 has really kind of put a spin on things, and then really creating movements from urge. And so like, we have an impulse, we have urge to move our bodies in specific ways that maybe not have meaning in the beginning, and then really digging deep. And I think the more that we rehearsed and the more that we started to embody these movements and this choreography, you know, we weren't alone. And so the importance of having another person hold space, I think, is really important for this type of work.
Well, and Linz, for me, like with Accord, because I wrote an article on, you know, a little bit on the process of Accord for the Tyee when I was interning with the Tyee. What really struck me, and I did attend a couple of your rehearsals, and then of course my sister, you know, was a part of the performance, so I got to hear about her experience in the rehearsals and in the final piece. I was there in person, but what really stood out for me is you have this group of Indigenous and non-Indigenous women, and this theme of, you know, reconciliation and holding space for one another. And I know from what has been shared with me that wasn't always easy to have these conversations for people to share their experiences, difficult experiences, traumatic experiences. But then it wasn't just about listening and speaking and holding space. It was then asking one another to then embody those experiences. Exactly. And then you weren't only doing that one time, you're doing it for hours and hours every single week. Exactly. So people who don't have the same kinds of traumas or the same kinds of experiences, they were asked to embody that, to scream as if they had had that experience, to fall as if they had had that experience, to hold you up, you know, in your trauma. So there was all of this embodied work that was happening, this healing, therapeutic work. So would you say that everything that you do as an artist, as a performance artist, as a counselor, has a certain aspect of embodied healing or embodied work intertwined and embedded in it?
I would say that's the goal. I think even beyond embodiment, I think prior to that, there's integration. And so when we look at impacts of trauma, an event that has happened into your life, we leave our bodies, we abandon that part of ourselves within that trauma. So I think the reclaiming of it is about being able to tell that story and be heard and be witnessed and validated in that space. And I think what's really important, the word integration, we have to continue to integrate aspects of ourselves that we don't like. I mean, in psychotherapy, they call it like shadow work, shadow of ourselves. We all have one because we all have light, we all have shadow. And so I think the most important thing of my work, even prior to that, is about the space, creating a space. And so what I mean by that is bringing in ceremony and bringing in ritual and bringing in specific practice. And for me, that's smudging. That's, laying down medicines. That's laying down language. That's, laying down gratitude. That's asking the spirits to come in, the ancestors to help us with the work, to hold the work. I mean, it's not just the bodies in the room. What we have to do is create the whole space for, I think, true vulnerability to really happen. And then that's where that story can really enter into the heart center and get processed in that, which is the hardest part to go. It's to stay in the head and tell the story of it. Sometimes we go in the throat area where we actually don't have the words. Sometimes we actually get stuck in the heart center where we don't feel anymore, where we have a numbness to it. And so how do we activate these parts of the body? And I think that was an experience that I think can mark, what I could do better next time, how I could be a better facilitator, how I could ground the work more, how I could leave more room for debrief, for even some of the conflicts and the misinterpretations that happened in accord. I think, I'm learning every time.
We're all learning, Linz.
And it's usually through making mistakes or seeing, that grinding that, we're not seeing eye to eye. And so I take this work very seriously. Sometimes I wish I didn't. I wish I was like more in comedy or humor or something like that. And I think eventually I might get there and might loosen up a bit, but I see the need in the community. I see the need in the community that, my very little experience with dance, I've done some contemporary dance, some flamenco, and it's one instructor and it's everybody's in rows and follow this one person and get the choreography. And, there's play there. There's the beauty of just moving and being in space and being in studio that I really enjoy. But there's another component and an element that I really want to bring to movement and sound and choreography, and that's people's stories. That's the authenticity of a person's body and the way that they move and the way that they breathe. I want to be able to see that and embrace that. And so that's, I think, the trajectory that I'm on after 2 years of doing collaborative performance. I'm really kind of taking a step back now and really understand what is it that I was doing, and who else is doing this in the world. I'm not the only one. This is not new. I don't think this is new. I think intuitively I'm getting the sense that this is how we've always created and supported our dancers and our singers in our communities. They were supported at young ages. They knew that they were going to dance certain masks or certain shawls, or they were going to be lead singers. And how did we nurture that mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally? And so the wellness piece with performance really has to coincide with my work as well, if it's going to be a holistic approach. And so that's things in the future that I'm looking to really cultivate and more Indigenous globally.
Yes.
You know, and really seeing the correlations. Yesterday we had a conversation about this word fusion. How do you fuse things together? And I thought, you know what, that's not the way that I do things. It's more about parallels. You know, we're working in parallels together. We're never fusing together. We're working interdependently, bringing our skills and our gifts forward, and we're embracing them. And each person has a role. Each person has a gift to bring. And so I think when we really create a space to allow people to come to terms what that gift is on their own terms, on their own time, I think it's really magical. And that's where creativity can really blossom, I think, in healthy ways, in good ways. Yeah.
Linz, the first time I met you, within 2 hours, I was naked in the grass, right? And can you explain? I mean, that doesn't usually happen. Like, that doesn't usually happen. And you're going to have to give some context. Why? What was that project? But the question I really want to ask is, you know, you deal with different themes, like you've mentioned, rage flowers, like violence against women, violence that we carry in ourselves, violence, lateral violence between one another. You know, you and Nahan with that piece dealing with, you know, residential schools, like you deal with really big, difficult topics in your work. But one topic that I've seen, not only in the project that I was, you know, honored to be a part of, but in some other posts that I've seen, is female sensuality, sexuality, sacredness. It's something like, how many women Indigenous women have you created a safe space for us to explore the topic of sexuality and explore that topic of what that means, Indigenous women's sexuality, sensuality, the dark, the beautiful, the light. Explain some of that, your work around working with women, Indigenous women specifically.
This all emerged back in 2013, actually. So about 7 years ago, I had this idea to do a project photographing women. It was really about erotic photography. It started off more in the erotic than the sensual. And that was just a desire, wanting to really push myself. I think every project that comes to me, I don't think these come from me. I think they come through me. I think they come from the third eye of all of us. We have it, you know, futuristic kind of thinking and a vision forward. And so working with women in this way has been the grounding force of my strength in my work, and it's been cultivated and shared with me through these relationships. And so I've learned how to work with women by working with women, by hearing how they like to be shot, their desires, like really being, I think, a sounding board and a very open one. And so energetically, there has to be a lot of that own work that I do for myself. So, so I don't get shocked, so I don't respond or behave or any body, you know, mannerisms that don't manifest to close people up. You want people to stay as open as possible. And so being very accepting, being very loving, you know, caring. I understand that, you know, it's been primarily males who have been behind the camera photographing nude women in different contexts that have been harmful. And so really recognizing that, you know, how I look through that lens really matters, that people did have experiences that weren't positive with cameras. And so really entering into the project with consent is extremely important. And I always leave an exit at the end of the project. You can leave the project at any time. All photographs that I take of you are yours. And so that transparency is really important as a strategy that I use. And so this work really came from the word squaw. I used the word squaw. It was just really big. It was like squaw. And really looking at the harmful effects of squaw, the derogatory term that was used to continue to oppress us. And I started to research about this word squaw and in some language it's phonetics, and it translated to the totality of being female. So they use it in different words like squay, squaw, squayo, and they're usually languages that attach those phonetics to identify that it's female. And so I started to really look at I think, the interpretation of those words and how they're used against us, but also looking at other ways that phonetic has been used in a positive. And so again, bringing in the light and the dark, it's like, how do you fuse that together to create momentum? It's all about creating momentum. And I started with people that I knew. I wrote a BC Arts Council grant, and I continued to title this work Squaw for a few years. I didn't get accepted the first year to do this grant, and got accepted 2014. Now, the very first photo shoot that I did was myself. It was very important that, in my understanding, is you cannot give somebody something that you haven't earned for yourself. I needed to be able to experience that. I needed to be able to give something to the women in the future. So it was really important that I was photographed first, that I understood what it was like to be in space with myself, with my body, with that exposure. Now, the nudity wasn't obligatory, but it was something that was very, I would say, when we think about sensuality and sexuality, nudity is very much right at that door. They're the same, but not all of the women that I photographed chose to take their clothes off. And so my mentor at the time, Emilee Gilpin, she photographed me, and my whole concept was working with fire. Fire as a portal. I went to the big house. I went to Alert Bay, and I was in ceremony there, and they had their sacred fire in the middle of the big house, and it's going, and I don't know, it just created a portal. I just saw the power. That fire is the portal. And so embodying that portal, how do we energetically use one another in a consensual way to transcend information or to receive information? And so that carry forward, that narrative really helped me to, I think, bring alliance. And so alliance as a method, as a strategy, is really important when you're working with women. You have to build that alliance. And so that story is something that I shared over and over and over and over again. And it was magical because every woman beside one woman wanted to be photographed in the land. It wasn't an original concept that I brought into the project. This is something that the women gifted after, so many years of photographing. I think I'm at 40 women I photographed now.
Wow.
40 women. And so by the time we had the exhibition in 2016 at the Legacy Gallery, there was 34 portraits in there. Indigenous women in the land, in the ocean, in cedar trees, in the grass, everywhere. These women just wanted to be in the earth, connected to Mother Earth. That's where the healing was. And then which carried forward into some other work that I did in clear cuts with another collaborator, Valerie Celez. So I think this work has been gifted to me, and I really take it with honor. And I really have to acknowledge the creator, and my ancestors for allowing me to do this work, and for the women that are involved to do this work. And it's been magical. There was one woman that I photographed, and she wanted to be inside only because she is not from the West Coast and didn't want to have any of the environment. She's a Northern First Nation. So we photographed her in my apartment, and it was a white stark background, and she wore some of her Arctic regalia. And she decided not to be in the project at the end of it. And so there's always an exit. And I think that's very comforting for people. The contract is in the word, the integrity is in the word, and the exit is in the honesty. And so that's how I like to work is, you know, using those value systems of our culture. I was reading yesterday some of, you know, Dialogue Gerald Alfred's work around peace, power, and righteousness, and looking at, you know, the values and the principles that we really need to bring forward in these contemporary times. And so the photographic work really was the crux and the leading me into performance, because after being with these women for, you know, a few years and in the land, it really started to bring me conceptually to a place where I knew that this was really important work, especially at the rise of the murdered and missing Indigenous women inquiry, when the movement of that, the red dress, the connotation of the red dress, the changing of the culture around the red dress, the bringing awareness. I mean, it was everywhere in Canada. And I think that's expanding now into other places in the world where women are rising up. They are, you know, clearing this area. We're clearing this area, and voice and narrative is starting to, you know, emerge. And we are looking for justice, and wherever that is for each individual is going to be different.
Linz, what are your thoughts around, I mean, there is such a hyper-sexualization of Indigenous women, and you mentioned, you know, this genocide really on Indigenous peoples that we've recognized now, that Canada itself has recognized as well, this ongoing crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women. What does this reclamation of a healthy sexuality, sensuality look like for you?
These are really good questions, because I think it's something that we need to keep talking about. I feel that the SQUA, which is now titled In Defiance, really emerged from a gap. You know, where was it in my life that I was able to talk about healthy sexuality? Where is it, you know, besides, you know, conversations with your friends and things like that, but it was always kind of behind the doors. And I think because of impacts of trauma and intergenerational trauma, those conversations may or may not get cut off in your household. And so really starting to look at, you know, where is that need or that unmet need? That's usually where, you know, our maladaptive behaviors come from, is an unmet need. And so I think looking at impacts of residential school was another stream that I really needed to consider, where there was a high volume of sexual abuse. And so our understanding of our relationship to ourselves, our understanding of our relationship to other, healthy boundaries and healthy intimacy, you know, we've unfortunately haven't been given that opportunity because we're Indigenous, because of the genocide, because of the rape and violation of our bodies. And so, you know, I think it's really important to continue to develop these spaces and, you know, use these themes in our work to be able to find that. And so I was hopeful, and I am still hopeful, that In Defiance and that process is part of the work that I could contribute to that. I mean, the very first conversations in that type of work is, you know, how do you want to be photographed? What is your dream? So it starts with dreaming. It starts with visioning. It starts with restoring. And I think that another impact of trauma is that we stop being dreamers. We stop visioning for ourselves, because we are in a hypervigilant state that needs to be flared at all times. That hypervigilance, we're in, I would say, a survival mode. And so when our bodies are always tense and in survival mode and waiting for the next shoe to drop, we don't have that internal space to go back into the imaginary, to go back into the dream time, to go back into that visioning. And so that's something that I'm hopeful that my work can provide. And I'm hoping that, you know, I think there's been other artists as well that have taken on this theme. You know, in the 80s, Rebecca Belmore, in the 90s, Rebecca Belmore has been doing this work. Jamie Black, you know, the red dress that she's exhibition that she had in the forest. I mean, that changed people's perception of a red dress. And so the awareness is one side of it. And through conversations a couple of weeks ago with Kamosin, we had talked about the importance of self-love, deep compassion and care for the self. So women really understanding the importance of self-respect. And it might sound like all of the responsibility is on us, and that's not true either. I think there's been a heavy load and a heavy expectations of women to do the work, and I feel like we have been. And then there's the other side of it, and looking at impacts of trauma and intergenerational trauma on our men, and some of the conditioning that and the normalization of violence and violation against women have been accepted in different places and spaces and countries in the world. And it's really interesting because this part of my throat is really telling me a lot right now. It's like we're still don't say anything when it happens. We still don't feel safe enough. We feel like we're wrong. The shame, I mean, the guilt that comes with that is really hard and heavy. And usually, only when we're older or strong enough or something, and then, or we meet someone that we know that will really hear us, we tell our story. And so, this is still happening around the world. I mean, it's a heavy topic to get into, but it's a real one. It's a real one. And it's something that we need to continue to keep an eye for our children, keep protecting our loved ones, our vulnerable ones. And to never think that, it could be happening to your next door neighbor, or, so the preciousness and the sacredness of our children really has to come back into our societies, as well as our elders too. I think about, the opportunity and my own privilege to be able to be in counseling and be in these educational contexts, to be able to really sift through this stuff and come out the other side and be able to be there for others. Not everybody gets that privilege and that right to do that. And so wellness is huge when I look at our arts community, addressing colonial Western constructs that still, hold up hierarchy and silencing of our voices. And so there's something about this area that we need to really attend to. That's a perfect image. That's, the wolf cry calling for your pack, that release. And so along with my performance work, I would say that the next step for me is really educating myself in somatic work, cathartic work, body wisdom, the body as an archive. We have all these memories and this blood memory stored within us. And so my hope is we started a collective very recently called Visible Bodies Collective. And I'm hoping that this is the collective that will really start to ground this work here in Victoria, to really use movement, sound, choreography, dance, and all genres, and bring in this huge story component and be able to have creation processes that allow people to move through this and for me, liberation, freedom, all the way. Like, what am I doing today to help me to feel liberated from my own conditioning, my own ego, my own oppression, my own internal oppression. And I use my work and I use performance and I use those mediums to be able to push the body forward and
smash through those narratives, right? Those narratives that we tell ourselves or that have been told to us, because we, as much as we are our stories, and there is power in the stories that we tell about ourselves and the stories that we carry. We're more than just the stories. We're more than just our experiences and our traumas as well. And sometimes I think we need to really work with those narratives that constantly hold us back, us telling ourselves who we are and what we can and can't do, or what others have told us and how we need to work through those voices. But Lynn, what words do you have around the act of witnessing? Because a big part of some of your public work has been, there's been an aspect of people witnessing, like, you know, if you can talk a little bit about this piece that took place here with Nahan, what did that piece address, and why was that important that that took place? And I'm sure there was a process leading up to it as well, but that this exact photo was taken in a public space where people witnessed, you know, and I know some people were moved to tears, some people were really inspired, and some people had to walk away because it brought up difficult emotions. Like, what is that around that shared artistic experience?
Right. That was a very interesting process because the energy, I think, between what I was bringing into the work was, you know, the deep compassion. And I think Nahan, and he works very much about addressing colonialism. So we really had to kind of bridge our practices together, where he had a very strong, you know, urge to, like, he's like, we need to show that the Bibles, we need to show the alcoholism, we need to show the harshness that was put upon us through genocide. And I'm always like, no, I don't know, it's too harsh, you know. But I think it would really push me to a place where it was like, this is how I'm going to understand more and deeper what my ancestors went through, you know. And so that piece was really about looking at, how did we relate, men and women, back then? How did we be in relation? For example, in our longhouse, men and women sit on opposite sides of the longhouse, and when we do partner dances, a man walks over, usually like your cousin or someone like that, and asks you to dance. And that's a good way to, I think, encourage our young men to approach women. It's the visibility of everyone. Nobody's hiding in a corner. Everybody's visible. Everybody's actions and behaviors is being witnessed by everybody. And so I think the witnessing component is really instilled in my cultural understanding. You know, we dance in the longhouse and we dance in our circle, you become visible. You become witnessed. You're like, oh, that's so-and-so's niece. That's so-and-so's sister. Oh, I didn't know she was related to her. Like, you know, totally being able to see the relations. And so witnessing, I think, is a very fundamental, universal Indigenous protocol or practice. We witness each other when we dance and we sing. We become visible. And so I think being on site and in the world with my performances is bringing that same methodology forward. You know, the importance of being witnessed. I think non-Indigenous people don't have the opportunity to see an embodied piece like the one me and Nahan and Eddie Wilson that we did. To them, they read it in history books, or they kind of dismiss it off the news, or, oh, I've watched that like, there's always a skepticism with it, you know, a denial. I think settlers haven't really been able to embody their own impacts of colonization and have reconnected back with their own cultural practices. And so I think that Indigenous performance is, you know, Indigenous art and Indigenous people take that leadership, especially in this country, when reconciliation was, you know, while we're living through the area of reconciliation. And so, you know, that piece was really about, how do we reconnect and how do we embody that deep connection again? And so Nahan, in the beginning, he painted he had a totem pole. He's a Pacific West Coast Tlingit artist. And so he painted my body as a totem to honor the feminine. And then I braided his hair, the masculine. And that was in the beginning. And then Eddie Wilson played the colonizer. And so we talked about how would she embody this colonizer? So if you can see, she has snakes in her hair. And she had this white mask that she wanted to bring forward. And so we looked at costume design, and she's really amazing at really bringing character by using these chains. And so she embodied a character that was a colonizer. And so we also started to look at different mythologies, Indigenous mythologies, where there was like an evil character. And in our culture, we have Taradaho, and he was an evil being with snakes in his hair, and he brought evil energy everywhere that he went. And so she used these snakes in her hair because we started to look at, the I think the shadow and the light, doesn't always come in a Caucasian person. It's like really addressing that whiteness and colonization isn't just in Caucasian people. It exists in all. It's globally. All cultures and ethnicities have adopted, have been imposed and colonized, and then continue to colonize. And so it's this intergenerational colonization that we're experiencing. And I think that my work is about intervening. It's like intervening. And so in these, even with Accord, we performed at the Parliament as well. This was performed at the Parliament as well. And so the Parliament building is the structure and the architecture that upholds colonial rule. It holds all of the ideologies, all of the oppressive legislation and law that was created against Native people. It is the architecture that is the whole visual of colonization. And so it was very intentional for me to intercept and intervene in that space. Accord was about women moving in the ways that they wanted to move. And I think remembering, that was the piece that me and Nahan had done, remembering. And so there was moments where after the braiding of the hair, the colonizer came and she separated us. She tied us up, and then she poured fake alcohol on us and took Bible pieces and started to put them on our body. I mean, I think that was the hardest thing to experience. But because of the environment and bringing ceremony and ritual into the rehearsals and grounding in a good way, it's really important that I think performers are not re-traumatized on stage, because what it does is it perpetuates that Native people are victims. And that's something that I do not want to perpetuate in my work. And so, and then there's the healing component. So it's like, what was before, what happened, but what can we do now as Indigenous people? And it's about remembering who we are, going back into resurgence, learning our languages, learning our songs, learning the ways that we related to Mother Earth, using the medicines, picking the medicines, eating the food. Like, that's the way that we're going to heal and come back together, is about remembering all those cultural practices that I think fundamentally carry the virtues and the values and our ethics. Our cultures, I think they hold the ethics and conduct. They tell us and teach us how to be a good person. They teach us how to relate to one another. And that's been the biggest impact of residential school, is taking the culture and the language and the customs, breaking that, removing children and then depriving them of these cultural understandings of themselves, growing up, without that instilled wholeness. And we're in, and that's where, my desire to be a therapist, a counselor, a healer, a person that is, using art in this very therapeutic way to really, I think, create a future, be able to come back into imagination and vision. And so remembering, really at the end of it, was me and Nahan freeing ourselves from these ropes and from these impacts of colonization by remembering. And there was a moment in the performance where we had like a semicircle around us of chairs, and I took this smudge bowl with a big eagle fan, and I went around and I just smudged the whole audience, and it was amazing. It was amazing. So you can't buy these moments. You can't predict these moments in performance, and you hope for them, though. You hope for them. You want that emotive response. You want to be able to know that they are there. They are present. And so the change that I'm trying to present, or the opportunity for change, or an opportunity for reinterpretation or a re-understanding of Indigenous peoples, is all offered. It's a generous offer in the performances. where it allows an entry point for people that don't understand or want to understand. They can understand, maybe not theoretically in the mind, but something happens viscerally in the body. Yeah. Yeah.
Liz, that reminds me of, it's Fanon who writes about the dehumanizing impacts of colonization, like the dehumanization that takes place through processes of colonization. And so if there's a dehumanization that happens and that exists in a country like Canada, a colonial country like Canada, and me being in the journalism sphere, I talk a lot about that. The history of newspapers in Canada have a colonial agenda. They have a colonial history, colonial narratives that were very stereotypical of Indigenous people, but more than that, dehumanizing. Anywhere that you've seen that there's been a colonial legacy or attempted genocide, there's been this process of dehumanizing a race or a group of people, right? And like you said, sometimes that's been Caucasian people, sometimes that's been Jewish people, that's been different groups of ethnicities, but there needs to be this process of dehumanizing so that these other groups or these other masses are somehow okay. It's justifiable because they're less than, there's an inferiority that takes place. So would you say that we work in the space of rehumanizing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what I've also started to understand is self-esteem. The way that we've been impacted through this dehumanization is our self-esteem. And so more our, I think, focus on encouraging and loving and being kind to one another. I can't say enough about self-respect because I think fundamentally that's where it all starts. And we don't know these things when we're young, when we're not taught them. We don't know. We go down the path. I've been down the path of all kinds of ways that showed me that I did not love myself, and it's only through these very hard experiences that I've lived that really propelled me onto a healing path. And so I think becoming human again is remembering that we're emotional beings, that we have feelings. And I think this is one of the biggest, traumas through dehumanization is cutting off our emotional body, that it's not valued, that how we feel about things is not valued. And in order for the colonizer to maintain its power and control, that inferiority and superiority complex has to maintain. And so what do we do? What do? We know it. We know it. We have to know it. We have to be aware that these power dynamics are at play. There's something really powerful for me around existential therapy as well, because they look at the inquiry is more about your existence, outside of anything. And it's more about use the example of a concentration camp and the way that you survive a concentration camp, the way that you still have choice if you're in a residential school of what you believe. There's some elders that have experienced residential school that would hide and practice their language. And so I look at resistance as being a crucial survival component in the way that we still are able to piece and stitch some of those protocols and practices together, that a huge amount of resistance. And so if we look at decolonization with Black people, with Indigenous people, people of color, that resistance has been the revolutionary for us. We have to be in resistance. We have to, at all costs and everything that we do, be in resistance of colonial rule. We have to resist the imposition upon us. And that's what we're sifting through right now. Looking at impacts of band council systems in our communities. We talk about Indigenous governance systems and implementing them into our communities. But if we haven't, done that internal work first, if we don't really understand who we are, who are you? Where do you come from? What is your culture? What is your songs? What are your stories? What is the values and the principles that your culture operates in? We don't need to be experts, but there's knowledge there for each of us to reclaim and reconstruct and then embody this and move forward. And so becoming human, so important in my work. Being seen, extremely important in my work. And I think the encouragement. I mean, it's such a cliche word, but encouraging people, dig, 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 feel, feel. I went to treatment back in 2016, and I had this very kind of cathartic experience in the morning circle that we had, and an elder grabbed me and he brought me into, it's going to make me emotional, but this elder, he grabbed me and he brought me into this room and he said, feel it, feel it, feel it. I know it hurts, but you have to feel it. Feel it. And he just kept looking at me. He's like, go deeper, go deeper, go deeper. And it just hit something that it changed my life, because I didn't have the opportunity to go that deep. And we need people in our communities that can bring us there. And hopefully, you know, I could contribute to that. And for me, that's about becoming human. You know, we have feelings, we feel things, and they need to be acknowledged. And the work that I create comes from that place. And I am ever so grateful for that elder for bringing me there, because through that experience, I know I can bring somebody else there. And so when we do our work and we do our healing, we need to know that it's not just for ourselves, that it's for others. And so we expand from that place of self-care and self-love and self-respect and being on that journey of healing. And then we can offer that to other people. And so I feel like that's kind of, you know, what my own healing journey has brought me to, learning really the shadow side of myself, and then coming into, you know, a better place. I'm not perfect. I was listening to Ruben yesterday, and that was something when you asked him, you know, is there anything else that you want to share? And he said, yeah, he's like, you know, that I'm not perfect. And I just thought it was so humbling. There's another elder, Okuyamten, and he's this super knowledgeable person that I really look up to, and I go to his sweats and everything. And I've heard him speak in community, and he always opens with, you know, I know very little. I know very little. And I'm always like, no, you know a lot, but it's coming with, you know, I'm still a learner. I'm still navigating a lot of my own behaviors and my own survival tactics that still come into play, but really engaged in the passion of art making and creating performance. And right now, where I'm at currently in my practice is looking at how do we reclaim land back by doing land-based performances. And so I've taken, you know, what the Indigenous youth were saying, land back, land back, land back, during the Wet'suwet'en solidarity actions at the Parliament building and across the nation. I started to say, you know, there is jurisdiction over the land in sort of like the law realm. And then there's other ways that jurisdiction of the land can come into fruition if reconciliation is really real in Canada, and we really are meaningful about this approach of reconciliation. It is about the land. It's all about the land. It's always been about the land, and it's about the impacts that Indigenous people have gone through because of the displacement of land. And so in my practice, that's something that I'm really starting to, I think, want to explore more, is that land back for me means being in the land, utilizing the land, occupying the land, and creating performances from the land. Without permission. You know, I could go anywhere in this territory with that type of ideology and be able to practice and use the land in a performative way. And that's my opportunity to feel and to be connected back to land. So yeah, I mean, there's I think a lot of power in performance, and there's a lot of powerful things that can happen in the body. And when multiple bodies come together, I think that's how revolutions have happened in our societies all over the world, is when the people come together. And it's interesting because impacts of COVID-19 is the exact opposite. No bodies together, no groups together. That's Celine, yeah. And so I think we need to remember, and I think there's been a programming, you know, it's to be afraid of people. Obviously, there's a pandemic that is real that I'm not going to deny, but I also want to bring forward in this conversation the importance of intimacy, the importance of closeness, and that when the time comes for us to be safe, to be able to hold one another, to do it a lot, to do it, go back and hug your friends and your family and be with the hold hands and embrace one another. Because we rely on each other as human beings, and that's part of also coming back from colonization dehumanizing us, is that we are human beings. We're made to be together. We work in groups, we work collaboratively, we're stronger with more minds. And it was interesting because yesterday you talked about the tobacco ceremony, about that elder saying we're coming to one mind. And that's like a very Kahnawake philosophy, is that's why we burn tobacco, is it brings everybody together in one mind. And we start off with our Honda Garbadekwa, which is our Thanksgiving to all of nature's beautiful offerings and gifts. And so I'm always really on the path of healing body, femininity, masculinity, really kind of, addressing trauma, intergenerational impacts of trauma, and bringing and highlighting the beautiful aspect of imagination and re-sparking that, reinvigorating that in people, and working from that place where they get to self-determine their pathway of creativity. And how do I, as a receiver or a holder, be able to honor that in a good way? Well,
I do feel like we are connected right now as well, because you kind of just started talking about things that I was just going to ask you about anyways. So I do feel connected in this space as well. And you can feel, when I was talking to Ruben about that ceremony that I was in Peru, in Quechua territories, and I was with a Quechua elder learning about their coca leaf ceremonies and coming to one heart and one mind on a physiological level, like a quantum physics level. You can feel the shift. Like, it's even beyond this. I think people think it's like this romanticized philosophy of like, okay, now we're all in one heart and one mind. And being in a sweat lodge, right? Like going back to the womb of your mother and feeling that interconnection. And it's been a part of different ceremonies that I've been in with different groups as well. Like you can feel a shift in the energy, in the room itself. But you talked about the importance of sitting in it, feeling it, and that powerful story that you shared of an elder saying, go into the room and feel it. I feel like that's happening a lot right now in this moment with COVID-19.
Yeah.
So what are your words of advice for people perhaps who they don't have a place to run, distractions are less available, substances are less available. There's been some concerning things. There's been a rise in domestic abuse. There's been a documented rise in domestic abuse in North America, at least, and I'm sure beyond. But this is a moment where we don't have as many escapes. And so a lot of us are having to feel the things that we don't want to feel, that we want to distract ourselves from, we want to ignore, we want to run from.
Exactly.
So what are your words around people who are trying to do that? They're trying to feel it, but it's hard.
Right. Yeah. No, this is a good question. I think it's a pathway we all do have to carve out individually, but some maybe advice or words that I could share is, if you can and it's safe to, I would say, building yourself a space in your house, in your room, or something that you could put sacred objects, whatever sacred means to you. It's funny. So building an altar, I think, is really important. And I would say that praying prayer. Even if you don't know how to pray, just help me is a very powerful prayer. Help me. I think praying is a practice that really works. I know it works. Maybe not in the moment, maybe not when we want it to work, but it does work. And so being really clear with your intentions when you're praying, even if you're not clear with your intentions, being able to talk to the Creator. So this is what's going to help this really start to clear, is how you speak to your higher power, how you speak to your Creator, And then ultimately that same reflection and that same love and surrendering that you give to your creator, you will give to yourself. And so in every Indigenous culture that I know, there is a higher power. There's a higher being. There's a higher universal force. There's life force. In all walks of life, we have a higher power. In Kahnawake, we call it Sungwai Dizu, and that's our creator. And so when we develop relationship with our higher power, it could be nature, it could be a hummingbird, it could be eagle, it could be something of where we understand that it's all accepting and all embracing. And Mother Earth is a beautiful way to connect because it could handle it. It wants it. Water can take anything. Cedar takes everything. Blue spruce takes everything. So what are the medicines around you available to you? Even incense, even aromatherapy, lavender. There's all these medicines that our people have used for time and again for centuries, for millennia, has been nature-based healing. Water, fire, smudge. I mean, the list is infinity. It really is infinity. You have sacred stones, rocks, our grandmothers and grandfathers. And so I think the more that we can ground and remember that there are medicines that take things that we want to give, we have to be willing to give it. We have to put our faith into action. You know, once we start to, you know, clear the voice and be able to learn how to pray and to be able to, you know, let go, we have to fill it also with new virtues and new values and new attitudes and behaviors. And we have to, you know, be able to be in good relationship to people that teach us. And so humility is a really important, I think, to lower our pride. You know, when we're hurt and we're harmed and we're in these places of self-protection, there's a lot of pride there. You know, and it really guards us from new teachings and new attitudes moving forward. And so how much are we willing to surrender and let go? And who is around us? Who are our teachers? If there's no person, then nature is also really a beautiful teacher as well. And so that's some of my advice and some of the restrictions that we have for people that can't be in ceremony or can't go to church or wherever their holy space is to really create that in your home or around your home.
And well, there's a big full moon tonight too to help with some.
It was really powerful last night. It woke me up to, supposedly it's called the flower moon or something like that. But, yeah, you know, using the moon, using the sun. I mean, these are powerful entities that will live for you and after you, and that centuries of Indigenous people have used to live, and we've always honored that. In all Indigenous cultures, we've honored the medicines, the sun, all of it. And so where are those rituals and practices where we could remember about gratitude? You know, gratitude is a real healing virtue. Remember that, you know, things could be a lot worse. And I know in certain circumstances, you know, what people have to live through is unfathomable. You know, but there's always, I think, when we're connected to spirit, I always see the power and the resilience of the human spirit wants to move. It wants life. Life just wants more of itself, more life.
That's right. And we're all on our own evolutionary journeys. It's something that's becoming really clear. We're in the selective evolutionary journey right now. This is a very obvious moment when the whole collective planet is saying things are out of balance. You know, you can't keep functioning in the way that you were functioning before. It didn't work. And as a planet, as we are evolving, there are restrictions, you know, there are boundaries, and we can learn from what nature is doing to protect herself in her own evolutionary journey, to protect her own life force. We can take note. How can we, you know, also put ourselves in a timeout? How can we learn from the boundaries that she's setting to create boundaries for ourselves in our own evolutionary journey as we are a part of this process, rather than just trying to explain away or ignore and say, well, I can't wait for things to go back to normal, right? There is no normal. You're not going back, you know?
No. And I think there will be a high percentage of human beings that do go back to normal. I think this is where some of the the paradoxes kind of exist. It's like some people want that normal and really need that type of normal, where I think that there's going to be a huge evolutionary shift with some of the consciousness of human beings through COVID that we won't see immediately, that we'll probably see kind of lingering down. But that real shift that you're talking about, and the realizations, the recognitions, the epiphanies that happen within this, more of this sitting still, more of the slow pace, more of less stress. I think it's a good time for reflection, you know, the type of job that you're in, the type of relationship that you're in, the friendships that you have. I think everything is a good time to really step back and seeing, you know, are you in fulfillment? Are you living your true destiny? Are you cultivating and nourishing your gifts? Are you using these gifts in good ways? Are you looking at your, you know, your bad behaviors, maladaptive behaviors because of unmet need? Are we continuing to disrupt relationships, or, you know, are we nourishing them? I think it's a good time to really do some deep reflection, and having ritual and ceremony within your life structure to really, I think, archive this time is really important. Journaling, writing, doing any type of creativity during this time to really archive it so you can take a look back. I think it's going to be really crucial and important for some of the shifts that we're going to be seeing in the next few years because of this. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I want to kind of come full circle. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but just to kind of close off, if you have any other thoughts, and then also before any closing words, if you could just update me. I know you're starting your PhD, or you've started your PhD. What are you involved in right now? And what can we keep our eyes open for in the year or the seasons to come?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I just appreciate you reaching out, you know, I mean, just asking me to come and share. You know, I'm not an authority on any of the topics. It's really just sharing from, you know, my experiences, my strengths, and my hope. And that's really what all I could offer is things that I've already lived through and been through. Moving forward, I'll be starting my PhD in applied theater at the University of Victoria. I'm currently the Indigenous Resurgence coordinator for the University of Victoria. And that is about reconciliation education for faculty. And so I've done a year of this position. And then starting the PhD, really looking at land-based performances. And it's actually really a beautiful time for me to unlearn. So for me, going back into education is kind of this unlearning and learning at the same time, really expanding what is happening globally with Indigenous performance, because I really want to build, I think, for my practice, a global Indigenous alliance, and how do we create performances from Indigenous people coming from Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA. Like, how do we bring multiple Indigenous nations together and continuing to build nationhood? And so for me, I think that's the leaving thought that I have for myself and for people listening is, you know, how are we continuing to build nationhood during COVID-19, but even prior to that, with all the Wet'suwet'en action, solidarity, and being in resistance is one thing. You know, it takes a lot of energy to be in resistance. You got to hold, and it takes a lot of energy. So we have to be able to cultivate spaces around self-care and reinvigorating and rejuvenating the spirit back. And so how do we hold those two at the same time? And when do we take space to be able to self-care and to be able to go back into the resistance, you know? And so bringing those two, the resistance and the self-care and the nationhood, I think is really important.
Thank you. Can you bring that precious baby into view?
Come here.
I want to see her.
Here? Oh, she's cute. Oh, there she is. Look who's here.
Hi, baby. Look how big and happy you are.
Can you say happy?
Happy.
Yeah. So happy. Yeah, it's really nice to see you. I really hope you're doing well out there. And
I am. Yeah, I'm taking care. These conversations are good medicine, hey?
Yes. Yeah. It's awesome work you're doing. It's really good work you're doing. Yeah.
Thanks, Lynn. Thank you so much for joining me. Is Guy around? Did he want to share any music?
Guy, do you want to sing a song? He's going to come and sing a song.
Okay, maybe he can introduce himself too for those who don't know him. He's pretty well known, but.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, she's getting really big and just growing awesomely. Are you gonna
The kids and the little ones have been really good medicine in these times as well, hey? I've kind of been adopted by this local group of kids here. I don't know if you've been seeing photos.
Oh my God.
Like my friends here are all under 15 years old, and they've been such good teachers. And you know, the other day I was working and online. You can only be online so much, really.
Yeah.
But I was online working and I was stressed, and then she comes to the door, and you know, I was like, oh, I'm working. I don't have time to kind of like cook and clean and do all these things. And then right away, she just brought me right back to the present moment. You know, she's just such a good little teacher, and kids are so wise, right? It's Joy Harrow who said kids are closer to the door of knowing.
Yeah. No, I it's remarkable to see all you around all the children, and the landscape where you are is like, whew, amazing. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna turn you to Guy, okay?
Okay.
Okay, there you go, Guy. Can you see? Oh.
Hey, bro. Good to see you.
You too.
What song are you gonna sing? You can introduce yourself.
My name is Guy, and I was born and raised in Victoria. And I'm from a place called Ahousit. That's on the Channel Nation. And the song I chose to sing is was given permission to us by the late Nelson Keatlan. And the words in it say that this land belongs to the Creator. And he was a negotiator for our people about lands and titles and stuff. And that's where he composed the song, This Land Belongs to the Creator. Yeah, 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 Go.
Hi. Thank you so much.
See you. Love you.
You take care.
For tuning in.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. See you next time. Bye, Destiny.